Okay, so this video will be going over the ability system and how we kind of lean into the client server model, and it'll just really kind of go over how abilities are structured and how they work. So there's a lot to kind of get into and a lot to explain, so I'll kind of just jump into the gist of everything. We'll start with the demonstration. We have the ground stomp ability binded to our Q key. And before I do a demonstration, I should probably explain that abilities are split up between a module script and a local script. The local script for an ability handles the animations and the UI. The module script handles all the communication and critical information that's needed for an ability. So, knowing that, here we have the ground stop ability. As I hold the Q key, we see this charge up. This is the max distance that will be affected in a radius. And this is handled by the local script. As I do that, that launch there is handled by the server, or the module script, really. Um, yeah, and this button as well, or not button, sorry, this distance is controlled by my stats, or my stats affect this distance. If I was a brute archetype, the distance would be higher, and the knockback would probably be greater. But I am not, and this is just what I have now. So that's based off my stats. So going into the logic a little bit more, he just went flying. Like I mentioned, we have a module script and a local script. Now, I believe the best way to kind of explain this is that this module script can be accessed in two different contexts, as a server and a client. And we'll kind of get a little bit deeper into this. I think we're going to start with the local script though. Like I mentioned, the local script is how we activate an ability, and it controls the UI and the animations. And it'll send off to this module script a remote event once we're ready to activate the ability. And let me go here. And we see here in this, for this ability specifically, this remote event is fired once the stomp track, once you're stomping down the ground, once a certain marker has been reached. And then we're going to fill it off, we're going to fire it with some data, which is based off the max distance that we can affect and how the scale of our UI. This is really essentially how long we held the button for, but this is how we're getting that. You might be wondering, how are we getting max distance? Like, where's that coming from? And that's coming from up here. The max distance is coming from our ground stomp module based off a calculation function, which is passing in ourselves, the player who's activating this. And so, as I mentioned before, the module script side of the ability holds some critical information and functions for how abilities should work, and it also defines the ability. So we'll go through here. You'll see here I have a types module, which is really just a module that has a bunch of type definitions that are exported. I do that because I come from a statically typed language background, and I like knowing what data I'm working with and having these annotations. So I'll kind of skim over this. This is just the definition of the ability and some back-end things that'll be used for other systems. But here we have this remote event that I was talking about. The local script fires this event off. And you'll see here we have client function headers and server function headers. You might be wondering, why do we have a client and server function headers? Well, what's that doing here? And that is because these module scripts can be accessed in two different contexts, or they are accessed in two different contexts, those being the server context and those being the client context. When the server runs this module script, we're going to be setting our client scripts for the ability. Client scripts initially don't exist on the client, and this is to prevent exploitation. Like I said, client scripts are how players activate abilities. That's how we acknowledge they have an ability. So we hold these in server storage, and when they do receive an ability, then we can pass them this client script. But this is held somewhere else. This is just part of the ability definition, and that's why that is here. And then what we're also doing on the server side of things is we're connecting to that remote event. Whenever a client tells us, hey, they want to execute this ability, right here, the server is like, okay, cool. They gave us a distance based off how long they held the button for. But as we know, we should not trust the client with a bunch of details, so we need to validate that. We can't trust client data all the time, so we need to validate this. And we're using the same function, the calculation function, to get us this max distance that you can stop. And if we find that the distance does not match up a great amount, then we're going to kick them. I think the kick system will probably need to be a little bit more comprehensive, but that's what's there for right now. And then what we're also going to do is going to fire off to all these clients using that same remote event. We're going to fire off to all clients, hey, this player just execute this ability, do what you need to do. And then we're going to knock the players who were in that distance. And really, we'll knock anything that's tagged as a launchable, not a lunchable, a launchable, which are just things that can be launched. And that can be anything that we set as a tag, set a tag on. And you might be wondering, okay, well, it's going to fire off to all these clients. How are the clients going to respond to it? When do they connect to it? And that's where this client side of the module script comes in, this other context, the client context. We're doing it right here. We're connecting to this remote event, and we do some VFX work. This generate stomp is really just a VFX function that will spawn the VFX there on the player. And all of that is played on the client. No effects are played on the server. They're all played on the client, and that's why this is here. And so all players load all ability modules when they enter the game so that they can respond to these remote events and they can see the effects and everything. There is one optimization that could be implemented here, though, is that we're firing off to all clients, and then all players, no matter how far away they are from whoever's executing the event, they will play these effects. And so that's could be a performance hit. I won't say, yes, it could be a performance hit, or that's just not as optimized as it could be, right? Like, we should only be spawning the effects if we're close to that player to where it can make a difference, right? So that's an optimization that could be, and that's just more of implementing a distance check to see if we should be spawning these. But yeah, so that's that, and here's just the calculation I mentioned, the calculation function that the client will do and the server will validate with as well. And this is based off your attribute, your strength attribute. This calculation here is a little bit arbitrary. Needs to be a little bit more thought out through some design and balancing and whatnot for builds. But that's the function there. And here's the generate stomp that clients will do to spawn the VFX. This is the VFX work. And here's the knock players function that the server will do to knock everything tagged as a launchable, right? Near the player. And this is right, only near the player will it launch things. And just some more helper functions here. But that's essentially how abilities work. There's a module script that handles the definition, handles the remote communication between server and client. And in this way, all abilities are kind of isolated between their module script and their local script, right? If we go up to this module script here, you'll see that it has all of the things that the client will need to play the effects, because we do everything here, the VFX work here. So everything's here. And then the local script, everything's there that it needs, animations and whatnot. So it's pretty isolated, right? Exploitation, I obviously exploiters can find ways to break things, but I feel like this is a pretty safe way to do things. We're kind of have a strict boundary between client and server, and I think that's important. But that's essentially how it's done. Any questions, I'll be happy to answer. Would love to answer questions. But yeah, that's the ability system, or at least the foundations of it. So thank you for watching.